Shyam? Shyam?
Yes, sir. Please start. You are live.
I think we should go live.
Yeah.
Good evening, friends. Welcome again to this wonderful Clinical Pearls Unique PG Track program by Delhi CSI. It's our proud privilege to have you all with us on this unique journey for the second series. The today's topic is very unique. It's an approach to a case of a pulmonary arterial hypertension, because this is one of the cases which we get. And we couldn't have get a better speaker, Professor S.S. Kothari, who agreed to our kind request. And more importantly, we have none other than Professor M. Khalilullah, who's practically the father of intervention of cardiology in India. He's the director and chief cardiologist of the Heart Center. We have Professor Sanjay Tyagi, Professor of Excellence, Director Professor and in Department of Cardiology, GB Pant Hospital. And we also have Professor HSSR, Professor of Cardiology in Safdarjung Hospital and Vardhman Medical College. Along with this, we have Professor Girish MP, Professor of Cardiology from the Department of Cardiology, GB Pant Hospital in this journey. And most importantly, we have all of you who are joining us on this unique journey. This is specially designed for you. This program is customized according to your needs, according to the programs, according to cases that you get in your exam, the problems that you face. And this is not particularly just a presentation. This is there to clarify all your doubts. This is a unique initiative that all of us have taken especially for you. So in the beginning, I would like to invite Professor Khalilullah to say opening remarks and invite all the panelists, moderators, and also introduce our speaker. And then we go and listen to this wonderful talk on pulmonary hypertension. Professor Khalilullah, please.
Hello?
Yes, sir, please.
Yes, I'm not seeing the picture, but though this is to appreciate the great initiative taken by Dr. Mohit Gupta and Dr. Balbir Singh as the PG track by the by the Delhi branch of Cardiological Society of India. Sorry. And also we have, I have in the great company of Dr. Sanjay Tyagi, Professor Excellence, GB Pant Hospital, Dr. Girish MP from GB Pant Hospital. These people have made it possible to have this program on. And I would like to express my great appreciation for Dr. S.S. Kothari, who is an excellent teacher and the professor of cardiology at the All Institute of Medical Sciences. I must say that while everything else can stop in the world because of COVID-19, but teaching and training can go on. And once again, to appreciate this effort, I go on to the audience now, and Dr. Sanjay Tyagi and Dr. Esar to take over the proceeding from now onwards. Thank you.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for starting this very important symposium, the teaching program for postgraduates. And we have very eminent speaker, Professor Kothari, who is a professor of cardiology, professor of pediatric cardiology, and eminent clinician in an examiner for many in universities all over the country. So we have the honor of having him here, and the topic that he has chosen for his presentation is also very important, the pulmonary hypertension. Let's hear from Dr. Kothari his presentation.
So can I go live?
Yes, please.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Perfect. Please go ahead.
So, well, thank you, Dr. Mohit first. This is a tremendous task taken by you. And I am it's my privilege to be here with Professor Khalilullah and Dr. Tyagi and Dr. Isar in chair. I would try to do my best. I have modified the title a little bit because I thought I will just talk with you. You know, it's not something which I will like to leak the exam. I'm not going to teach anything. I'm just going to talk to you at leisure about pulmonary hypertension, what comes in my mind. Some of it may be of use to your exam. Some of it may be of use in other than exam. So let's talk about pulmonary hypertension. Before we start, I have something more fundamental to tell. We are all comfortably in our homes and trying to learn, but you know, there is a fundamental issue about knowledge. It's an old saying that he who is seeking knowledge should give up comfort, and who is seeking comfort should give up learning knowledge. Now, if you want to learn new knowledge, cannot be so comfortable as we are nowadays that you will download all these webinars and then read it some other time. That wouldn't happen. So COVID will not last always. As soon as COVID is over, we'll get back to our bedside, because that is where medicine is learned and medicine is practiced. So till then, let us make best use of whatever is available, and we will talk about pulmonary hypertension. Now, for a seminar like this, I understand that people are at various level of exposure and people have different expectations. I'm not very sure what shall I do, but what I thought is we will just keep a core message, core curriculum at a medium level. So this is not for somebody who is very well into the PAH, but this will generally be picking up the basic issues about pulmonary hypertension. You know, pulmonary hypertension diagnosis is important. No matter what cardiac case you have, you are supposed to make diagnosis of PVH, PH, whether it is there or not there, how much it is there. And pulmonary hypertension in general is underdiagnosed. So many causes are there for PH, and numerous factors influence the management of PH patient. So in that kind of a situation, I think the best thing to do is to think physiologically about pulmonary artery hypertension. And when we start with physiological thinking, here are some issues for you. So let us see, what do you think is the normal PA pressure? So you can answer. Unfortunately, I cannot see you, and answer. Talking without your feedback is a little difficult for me. This is very new. So you think for yourself, what is the normal PA pressure? You would guess, you would like to tell me. How much PA pressure can rise when a normal person exercises? What is the normal pulmonary vascular resistance? How much pressure can a normal RV generate? What happens if you occlude one branch of pulmonary artery? So answers to these will influence our understanding of the pulmonary circulation. So it turns out that the normal pressure is not more than 14 millimeter. Normal mean PA pressure is 14 millimeter, and it across the board and numerous people. And also it is important to state here that even in children, beyond first 3 months, the PA pressure normal is around 14 millimeter only. Although we tend to equate it with systemic pressure half and things like that, normal PA pressure in children and adults beyond 3 months is only 14 millimeter of mercury. So that even if the PA pressure has become 20, you think there is already a high PA pressure.
Hide self view, hide non-video नहीं hide self view कर दो ना.
Can I continue?
Please continue, sir. Please continue.
Okay. So when we exercise, there is a recruitment in the lungs. In the lungs, even usually, exercising PA pressure is difficult to quantitate. It increases with age. But the cutoff that we have kept is that normal on exercise, routinely PA pressure will not go beyond 30 millimeter mercury. PA mean. Normal PVR, what is the normal PVR? We say PVR normal is, less than 5, 6, 7 Woods. Now, when we talk of Woods, it is in 1, 2, 3, 4. So we miss a point. If we would have talked in normal Dians, that is Wood into 80. So normal PVR is only 1 to 2 Wood units, which means if the PVR goes by 4, 5, you appreciate that the cardiac transplant is contraindicated if the pulmonary vascular resistance is more than 5 Wood units. Liver transplant cannot be done if the PVR is more than 5 Woods. So although it is 1 to 3, it looks very simple, but between 2 and 3 and 4 Wood units, there is a miles of difference. So normal PVRI is less than 2 Wood units. Normal RV can acutely generate about 50 to 60 millimeter mercury pressure. So should you have a patient in casualty with RV pressure of 80, it's probably a chronic, or 90, then it means it is an acute and chronic situation. What happens if you occlude a PA branch in PA pressure? Nothing happens. Normal lung has enough reserve so that occluding one branch does not increase PA pressure. Conversely, if that means one lung is gone by parenchymal disease, the pulmonary pressure do not go up. So for pulmonary pressure to go up because of lung diseases, you need to have a lot of lung disease, lot of parenchymal damage. Why I'm bringing out this is just, often you say there is a component of LRTI in PH patient. So just think how much LRTI can change a PA pressure. Gross hypoxia can change because hypoxia is a very gross vasoconstrictor. Normal LRTI, a little bit of lung disease does not increase PA pressure. Now, if there is a baby with one pulmonary artery only, in that setting, the PA pressure is quite high. So in adult, when the lungs are full grown, one occlusion doesn't make a difference, but a single pulmonary artery in a child is associated with severe PH. What are the vasoconstrictors? We know all hypoxia is a severe vasoconstrictor, acidosis is a severe vasoconstrictor, and hypercarbia is a vasoconstrictor also. So at this juncture, I would just like to bring in, nowadays we do permissive hypercarbia, so that if you ventilate less and let the patient have hypercarbia, how much of carbon dioxide is allowed to increase PA pressure? So what are the limits of permissible hypercarbia? That's what the point I'm trying to bring. You see, acidosis is a very severe vasoconstrictor. Hypercarbia is not that bad. Hypoxia in some circumstances is bad. So when you are trying to keep permissive hypercarbia or you hyperventilate for managing pH, there are 2-3 issues which one should be clear. That normally we do not cross a pH of 7.2 when we create permissive hypercarbia, and we do not cross PaCO2 beyond 70. Although PaCO2 up to 300 is also compatible with life. Other way around, when we are doing hyperventilation to decrease PA pressure, generally hyperventilation to reduce PA pressure is not a good idea. Why? Because with hyperventilation, PaCO2 comes down. And when PaCO2 comes down, what is it which is troubling the body? With decreasing PaCO2, there is a cerebral vasoconstriction, which is never a good idea. So even in traumatic situation where with increased cerebral pressure, you want to reduce hyperventilate, you do not do it too much. So remember, PaCO2 below 30 is a bad idea for cerebral vasoconstriction, and we do not tend to include that. All right. Now, when the lungs collapses, what happens to PVR? Is the collapsed lung which increases PVR, or an emphysematous lung which increases PVR? It turns out that both of them increase PVR. So PVR is best at its lowest when the lung is in optimal lung volume. So considerations such as these would be important in our physiological approach to PA pressures. Now, when you know your patient of PH can come at any of this stage, what happens? You know the natural history of PH. There is a pre-symptomatic phase when the RV is able to handle. Then there are symptoms, and when the RV progressively worsens, then there are heart failure and there is a decline. What is happening to PVR? PVRI in some diseases can go on progressively worsening. One of the job that you must understand or try to understand is what are the reasons for increasing PVRI in any disease process. Most of the disease processes like Eisenmenger, primary pulmonary hypertension have a progressively worsening PVR. And what happens? The vessels keep on closing by, with time. So PVRI goes on worsening, and when PVRI worsens, heart is able to handle up to some time with the RV hypertrophy, and then RV starts failing. Now remember, when RV starts failing, the PA pressure may in fact fall. So like some of the patients, when we try to do port shunt nowadays, we think we want a suprasystemic PA pressure, but it might well happen that with fall in RV function, PA pressure actually comes down, whereas actually the resistance is very high. So this slide basically demonstrates what happens, what are the limits of a normal pulmonary, normal pulmonary responses, normal RV responses. As long as cardiac output is maintained, nothing much happens. Patient is a little bit asymptomatic, and therefore PH is a cardiac disease. It's not a lung disease, because the primary determinant of mortality is the heart response to it. Well, so what next? So let us define pulmonary hypertension. What is pulmonary hypertension? We say PA mean pressure more than 25 is pulmonary hypertension. With that, you have to have PA wedge less than 15 if it is pre-capillary pulmonary hypertension. If the wedge pressure is more than 15, like the left heart disorders, then PA pressure will automatically rise. And so then you have post-capillary pulmonary hypertension with a wedge pressure of more than 15 and a systolic pressure more than 25. How do we think about this? So when you have increase in PA pressure and increase in wedge pressure, we tend to think of a transpulmonary gradient. What is happening in the lung circuit? So if there is a transpulmonary gradient of more than 15, which means PA mean minus LA pressure, if it is more than 15 transpulmonary gradient, we say there is a lung vasculature disease, there is a pulmonary vascular disease. And if it's less than 15, we say the lung vessels are okay, it is all transmitted, back pressure is transmitted. So I should isolate it post-capillary. Now what is better? Is it a transpulmonary gradient better or diastolic pulmonary gradient is better? So transpulmonary gradient means PA mean minus LA pressure. That will vary with PA systolic also. It will vary with PA pressure, PA pulmonary flow. So therefore, transpulmonary gradient is not as good as diastolic pulmonary gradient, and now we tend to talk of diastolic pulmonary gradient. So diastolic pulmonary gradient normally PA diastolic and LA pressures are within 3 to 4 millimeter of each other. We say maximum 7 millimeter. So if the PA diastolic is more than 7 millimeter above LA pressure or PA wedge pressure, then we think that there is some pulmonary vascular disease and there is a pre-capillary component. Patient of mitral stenosis, for example, if he has a LA of 25, the normal lung would have a LA PA diastolic of 30 or less than that, like that. So diastolic pulmonary gradient of 7 is the cutoff. Transpulmonary gradient, PA mean minus LA is 15 millimeters is the cutoff. And that would mean that there is no pulmonary vascular disease by itself. And otherwise, there will be pulmonary vascular disease. Now, I can see some of you wincing already that it is not PA mean 25, but latest, the sixth World Society has made it PA pressure 20. And currently, everybody say PA mean of 20. So I would like you to understand why did we make it 20? It is not good enough to follow that previously it was 25, so we say 25, now it's 20, so we say 20. What is it which had made this change from 25 to 20 as a cause of PAH? Remember, we said normal PA pressure is 14 and the standard deviation was 3. So 14 plus 6, that means 2 standard deviation makes it 20. So it has been found that vast majority of the time, PA pressure mean more than 20 would indicate a disease. Previously, we thought 20 to 25 may be a borderline situation, but now people have got more data to say that when they have 20 to 25 also the disease could progress. So when they said PA pressure of more than 20, and it also, so in this, the latest change, what are the changes? One change is that the PA mean has been made from 25 to 20. They've also added the concept of PVR, and we'll come to that in a minute. And they've also made minor changes in the grouping so that one can read. So as of now, we say PA pressure more than 20 mean is pulmonary hypertension. If there is a wedge pressure of less than 15 with a mean of 20, we say it is a pre-capillary hypertension. If the wedge is also more than 15, we say post-capillary hypertension. In such setting, the diastolic pressure gradient will be less than 7. Otherwise, the diastolic gradient will be more than 7 millimeter mercury. And then there are disorders according to this classification. So let us see, just for the clarity's sake, you have an increased PA pressure. When do you have increased PA pressure but no pulmonary vascular disease? So suppose PA mean is instead of 20 or 15, it is about 40. But suppose that particular patient has a high pulmonary blood flow, then there is no pulmonary vascular disease. And or suppose there is that particular patient had high LA pressure, so therefore everything was back pressure, so therefore there was no pulmonary disease. And how do we distinguish between these two? So then we have to bring in the concept of pulmonary vascular resistance, because when PA pressure minus pulmonary wedge pressure divided by pulmonary blood flow, if it is normal, then we say pulmonary vascular resistance is normal, and it is less than 2 or 3 units. If it is more than 3 units, then we say there is a pulmonary vascular disease, and there is, so pulmonary hypertension could be because of pulmonary vascular disease type 1, or it could be because of increased pulmonary wedge pressure type 2, and things like that. The converse of it is not very well understood. That means, can you have pulmonary vascular disease with normal PA pressure? What are the settings where you could have normal PA pressure, but there is some pulmonary vascular disease? Now, such thing can happen, suppose the pulmonary flow is very little, so that your QP is very low, and even 20 PA mean pressure could give you a PVR which is higher than 3. Such things could happen in Fontan circuits and in some of the other situations. People have now appreciated that one can be having thromboembolic PH without resting PA pressure. So that means you could have a thromboembolic disease without a PA pressure raise. So these arguments are being brought forward just to make you understand that it is the critical element of understanding in pulmonary vasculature is the pulmonary vascular resistance. So what is pulmonary vascular resistance? Pulmonary vascular resistance PA mean minus PA wedge divided by pulmonary blood flow. High pulmonary blood flow can give you PA pressure high without pulmonary vascular disease, and vice versa. Remember, pulmonary vascular resistance is indexed. Normally, it is indexed with body surface area, but the index value is multiplied. So it is the Wood units into millimeter per square. It is not, PVR is not equal to Wood unit per square meter. It is Wood unit into millimeter square, because the QP is in the denominator. If you make it QPI, then it actually increases, which means in an infant, the PVRI will be lower than PVR, and in an adult, because you will multiply by more than 1, the PVRI will be higher than PVR. Resistance in electrical circuit, it is quite equal to electrical circuit. You can think the resistance in electrical circuit is equal to voltage and the flow, and it is otherwise measured as 8 NL by pi into R square 4. R is the diameter of the vessel. So you can imagine a slight diameter of the pulmonary artery can make a lot of difference to the pulmonary vascular resistance. So in this formula, L is the length. So if you have a lot of length available, a lot of lungs available, the PVRI is low. But if less length is available, then PVRI is high. So what is N in this equation? You can write for yourself. What is N in 8 NL by pi R4? Telling about resistance. So N is here viscosity. And that brings another point that when we talk of resistance, we don't really take viscosity. So for the same degree of everything else, if somebody has a high viscosity, for example, 22 hemoglobin, his PVR increases markedly. Actually, if you compute this, you will realize that a change in viscosity of 2 from 17 to 22 makes a lot of change, but this factor is generally not considered except in serious congenital heart diseases. Well, so all in all, leave this aside. Finally, you would have a patient with pulmonary hypertension. Either he will have congenital heart disease, or he will have IPH and its variant, or he might have lung disease. He may have multivalvular or left heart disease, or he may have CTPH, or a combination of all this. So when we say IPH and its variant, you have portopulmonary hypertension, you have connective tissue disorders, and you have Eisenmenger syndrome. That is type 1. Now, you don't like this kind of simple approach, and you want that PAH approach class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can have that. But this is simple for exams, and this brings out Simple case, simple things. So couple of things I want to clarify. Suppose you have a patient with Eisenmenger, or you have a patient with portopulmonary hypertension, or you have a patient with scleroderma. What is the histopathology in their lungs? Is it same? Is it similar? Or are they different? So all type 1 have a similar histopathology. Heath-Edwards class 1 to 6, 5 is applicable for all type 1 patients. All type 2 patients will have their different kind of histopathology, but if they have a pre and post capillary, then pre-capillary component could also bring out such histopathology. And you have a combination of all this. For a clinician, combination part is very important. You have a patient with marginal lung disease and also a severe PH. So how much of it is because of lung, how much of it is because of heart, and that kind of things will make your clinical assessment a little more complex and a little more interesting also. So for the time being, suppose we say we have a patient with pulmonary hypertension in exam. See, patient will not come with a diagnosis. Patient will come with some symptoms, and we have to make a diagnosis. So when do we think of PH? And you know that if patient has dyspnea, has fatigue, has syncope, angina, hemoptysis, ascites, edema, cyanosis, we think of pulmonary hypertension. In the science, if there are parasternal lift, loud P2, right ventricle third and fourth sounds, TR, PR, we think of pulmonary hypertension. So let us analyze this in a little bit of more detail for somebody who is not very well into it. Now, simple questions: what causes dyspnea? And you will be it is a remarkable blind spot for cardiologists. Having become a cardiologist, we forget the general system totally. I have never found an answer to this question by a cardiologist saying anything other than PVH. For a cardiologist, dyspnea is only PVH. If you ask more forcefully a bright student, what causes dyspnea and PVH? He might say J receptors. And there the answer stops. So we must have a holistic approach to dyspnea. We must recognize that dyspnea is a very peculiar symptom. If you see the definition of dyspnea nowadays, dyspnea is a subjective discomfort of varying quality, of varying intensity. Meaning thereby that dyspnea occurs in various shades. Dyspnea occurs from many disorders. Dyspnea is not only PVH. And PVH causes dyspnea by stimulation of J receptors, that is true. But a lot of cardiac disorders have dyspnea because of many other things also. So what is your answer to dyspnea and PH? Dyspnea and PH could occur from many things, either from mechanoreceptors in the lungs. The other answer that many times students give is that the cardiac output is reduced, so skeletal muscles suffer from decreased cardiac output. But you see many patients of PH are very dyspneic even when they are class 2. So that means cardiac output is not very low. So all in all, dyspnea in PH is not simply worked out. It is not simply a matter of J receptors. It is also pre-capillary. It could be because of a slight hypoxia from a right to left AST shunt. It could be because, so functionally, body looks at dyspnea from various mechanisms. By ventilation, efferents from skeletal muscles, efferents within the lungs, emotional and central. So any of this could cause dyspnea. How do we measure dyspnea? You see, we have patient talk, we say dyspnea in all, but broadly speaking, dyspnea is talked in 3 different terms. Patient have difficulty in breathing takes effort. Patient takes more time or more effort for breathing, or they feel tightness in constriction, or they feel air hunger. Now, can we diagnose different diseases based on these different symptoms? Probably we can, but we have not looked into this very seriously. And I suggest that you read dyspnea in detail because there are very few symptoms in cardiology. How do we measure dyspnea? We talk of NYHA class, but dyspnea measurements are done on very many scales like Borg index, like visual analog scale, modified MRC scales, etc., etc., etc. So we should have some idea of how dyspnea is measured in terms of objectively analyzing it. Okay. Similarly, what is the cause of angina in PH? PH angina obviously is because of right ventricular demand supply. Also remember sometimes, and this I'm sure you know, left main compression by dilated pulmonary artery can cause angina, and that could be reversible sometimes. Syncope is very interesting in PH. Syncope and pre-syncope are signs of fixed cardiac output and severe PH. What is the cause of hemoptysis in PH? Have you ever wondered that hemoptysis in PH and hemoptysis in tetralogy are because of similar things? When the vessels get occluded, the collaterals form from aorta and they often tend to bleed. Sometimes hemoptysis in PH can be messy from dissection of the pulmonary artery, and that could be fatal. So hemoptysis could be a problem. What is the hoarseness in PH? Hoarseness is because of recurrent laryngeal paralysis by PAH. And do you think it can tell the cause of PH? Yes. Hoarseness is much more common in IPH or in PH with PDA. It doesn't seem to happen with PH in Eisenmenger VSTs, or it doesn't happen with other AST Eisenmengers. At the clinical level bedside, can you tell me it is the recurrent laryngeal palsy? Yes. If the patient coughs and he has the bovine type of cough, you can hazard a guess that yes, this looks like recurrent laryngeal palsy. Can pH cause bendopnea? You know, this is a new term, fancy term, and it has been equated, it has been brought out in patients with heart failure. One study has also said that IPH patients have bendopnea because of similar reasons, that right ventricular filling pressures are raised. I do not believe it personally, but one should know that yes, it has been reported. How about orthopnea in a patient with PH? Normally, PND would rule out a pre-capillary hypertension. PND would mean there is post-capillary point problem. But orthopnea in a PH happens later on in the course of disease when the large pulmonary artery by mechanical compression of the bronchus can cause orthopnea. Very late PH patients also develop LV dysfunction, but that is a very rare thing and a part for the elite group. What are the clinical signs? I think the graveyard of examining is the apical impulse, whether it is RV type or LV type. And you keep on struggling and you keep on wondering whether this is right or not. So PH patient can have LV type of effects if the PH is because of the hyperkinetic situation or because of LV volume overload, or RV type of effects if it is purely prekinetic and in heart failure. One would have cardiomegaly in IPH and ASDs, etc. Parasternal heave is a problem in physical examination so many times. It is not intuitive that patients with Eisenmenger syndrome do not have parasternal heave. Most of the patients with Eisenmenger syndrome, which means VST and PDA, do not have a parasternal heave. And parasternal heave actually should be divided into pressure type and volume type. Just as you divide LV effects into pressure and volume, that means heaving or hyperkinetic, parasternal heave should also give you similar information. If it is sustained, it is a pressure load. If it is hyperkinetic, it is a volume load. For example, ASD would give you hyperkinetic pH unless there is Eisenmenger. Alone TR can give you a hyperkinetic or a mixed parasternal heave. Now, there are errors in assessment of parasternal heave very often. And part of the reason is that one does not appreciate that heart moves back, RV moves back in systole. So when it moves back and it comes back, sometimes that routine movement is also appreciated as parasternal heave. And sometimes you find patient of AR, you say parasternal heave, and it turns out to have no pH. Because the AR patient, when the LV moves, the heart moves in, and that you misunderstood as parasternal heave. So make sure that when you say parasternal heave, it is actually heaving of the parasternum. Mitral regurgitation, can give you late parasternal heave. That is simple. What about P2? Palpable P2 is very important. Now here again, pulsatile pulmonary artery or faint pulsation in a thin person should not be taken as a palpable P2. When you say palpable P2, it should be really palpable second sound. And very often, we see that a thin chested wall, little bit of pulmonary artery pulsation is mistaken as palpable P2. Third, fourth heart sound, pulmonary artery, palpable pulmonary artery will be a good indicator of pH. Peripheral bruise in axilla and pleural effusions. We'll come to that a little later. Now, what about P2? P2, when you say loud P2, so simply loud P2, when it's compared to A2, it is loud. When it is louder than A2, we say it is loud P2. If it is heard at apex, certainly it is loud. If it is palpable, it is loud. And normally with the loud P2, the split becomes close. So in a patient of ASD, they had a wide fixed second sound. When they develop PH, second sound becomes closed and fixed. It is still fixed, but it is closed because the P2 has become closure. The hangout intervals have become smaller. Pulmonary impedance has worsened. So a closed split second sound is a sign of PH. When the RV dysfunction and RV failure develops, then again the P2 becomes wide. So a wide fixed second sound in a gross RV failure could also happen because of RV dysfunction, but that is uncommon. For all practical purposes, a nicely split second sound gives you some idea that pulmonary vascular disease is not too bad. When there is a real PAH, a real PVD, most of the pulmonary second sound becomes close, and when it fuses, becomes single also. Constant ejection click is seen in PH. Inconstant ejection click, if you see sometimes, you can give a reference that Perloff feels that there is inconstant ejection click in PH also, and it could be true very rarely. For all practical purpose, PH click is constant click. Should you find inconstant click, you should know the reference. TR, murmur. Now, systolic murmur of PH. Remember, when there is a dilated pulmonary artery, it does not give a murmur. Only grade 1 or faint murmur can occur from dilated pulmonary artery. If there is a lot of pulmonary regurgitation, then forward flow through pulmonary artery could also give grade 1 or grade 2 murmur, but not louder than that. And pulmonary regurgitation murmur can tell you whether PH is there or no. PH is not there. Can we say what is PA pressure from the loudness of second sound? Yes, you see the previous empirical observations are validated nowadays with hard science, and that is a good thing. We tend to see so many things on physical examination based on old books, but a lot of it, you will be surprised, a lot of it has been done with a lot of care, and most of it is right actually. except for the sensitivity specificity of maybe not very high. So should you find a loud second sound at the apex, the PS systolic pressure is actually usually more than 70. And the more and more wider it is heard, the higher pressures are there. Now, what is the exception to this rule? That you are hearing a P2 at the apex, but the PA pressures are not high. So such a thing happens in an ASD or anywhere where the RV makes the apex. So suppose you have a normotensive TR with the RV apex, you can still hear a P2 at the apex, which may not be loud. When do you say loud P2? When it is louder than A2. When it is a single second sound, then how do you say it is loud P2? If it is a single second sound, then you cannot claim that it is a P2. Neither you can say it is heard in the pulmonary area or aortic area. So there you have to go by, if it is louder than first second sound, then you say it is a loud second sound. Whether it is loud A2 or loud P2, you have to argue with the findings. By and large, there are not many causes of absent aortic sound. So if it is second single sound, aortic has to be present. P2 could be fused with it. So you have to rationalize accordingly. When you see a TR murmur, it is a very nice thing because you will be able to tell whether it is a hypertensive TR or a normotensive TR. You know, normotensive TR will be early systolic murmur, will be low pitched murmur, and it will be decrescendo murmur, whereas a hypertensive PR would be pensystolic loud with the CV waves. Now, early systolic TR murmur will automatically put you that PA pressures are normal. High PA pressure, high TR could mean PS may also be there. So it does not necessarily mean PH. If you rule out PS, then yes, it would mean PH. Can it produce pulsatile lever? How much pressure is needed to make a pulsatile lever? So should you find a pulsatile lever, you do not automatically say it is high pressure TR. Even Epstein with severe TR can give you pulsatile lever. So it is computed that any PA pressure more than 30-35 can give you pulsatile lever. So pulsatility is a sign of a quantum, not sign of a pressure. Can JVP tell you high pressure or low pressure? Probably not. What happens in pH in a JVP? If there is a TR, there is a V wave, but in an absence of TR, you can find a dominant A wave with a sign of RV non-compliance. When you say PR, pulmonary regurgitation murmur is very important for identifying PA pressure. And you can distinctly distinguish between high pressure PR and a low pressure PR. Low pressure PR are the types of PR you see in post-op tetralogy or absent pulmonary valve with a normal PA pressure. High pressure PR sounds like a AR murmur. It is high pitched, it is long duration, it starts with P2, and P2 is palpable in these cases. Low pressure PR is a low pitched murmur. It often confused with the mitral stenosis murmur. Sometimes it looks like a tricuspid floor rumble, but basically you have to realize that it starts after gap from P2. So there is a small gap which is important for a low pressure TR, and it is a soft sound. So once you see low pressure TR and high pressure TR, you don't mistake. The problem comes that when you have a TR, a high pressure PR, and you have a rheumatic heart disease patient, you have to distinguish it from AR and PR. So that you have to see whether it's increasing with inspiration, whether there is a thrill. See, aortic regurgitation by and large does not give you thrill in the front of chest. AR gives thrill only when there is a VST associated with it by and large. So if there is a thrill, if there is a lower pitch murmur, if the murmur starts with P2 and if it increases on inspiration, then you can say it's a high pressure PR murmur. These are almost elementary, but I'm repeating it for the sake of somebody who may benefit from this. Now, can you have a pulmonary regurgitation murmur, but wide collapsing pulse pressure? That means peripheral signs of AR, but actually patient has no AR. He has only got pulmonary regurgitation. This is a common trap in the exam. So you have a patient of PDA, PH, PR, and his PR is masquerading as AR because of PDA. Although the murmur is only PR, which is a high pressure PR, sounds like AR, and peripheral signs are AR, but actually there is no AR. So one is to remember such traps and make it correct clinical decisions. Okay, so when you have a PH, you find there is PR murmur or TR murmur. Now, how do you distinguish whether there is a hyperkinetic pH or obstructive pH? By hyperkinetic pH, I mean pH is because of increased blood flow in the lungs, whereas obstructive pH is Eisenmenger pH with a normal blood flow or less blood flow. Obviously, second sound is loud in both. But there is evidence of a shunt. So there is a cardiomegaly. In ASD, there is a wide and fixed second sound. In VSD, there is a shunt murmur. So there is a murmur of VSD and a murmur of mitral flow murmur. So how do you quantitate a shunt? This is simple. In a VSD and a PDA, mitral flow murmur will make you shunt more than 2:1. In an ASD, a tricuspid flow murmur will say that there is a more than 2:1 shunt. So should you have evidence of a large shunt, mitral and tricuspid flow rumble, ASD outflow murmur, then you say there is a hyperkinetic pH if the patient is a loud P2. Other way around is the obstructive pH. So hyperkinetic pH would have a normal PVR. PVRI will be less than 3 or 4, and obstructive pH will have a high PVR, maybe 10, 15, 20, whatever have you. So when there is obstructive pH, the patient become cyanosed. So then, having thought of this in a very general way, let us see, for benefit of undergraduate, postgraduates, why my findings are wrong. Sometimes you say, okay, I knew all that you told me for last 10, 15 minutes, but I knew all that, but why my findings are wrong? It could be wrong because of misinterpretation, because you didn't train yourself. Just 1 week before exam, you started going to ward and started using stethoscope. And very often, anytime you put stethoscope between the two ribs, you find P2 wide and fixed, because the chest rib is giving the trick. So one is lack of training. Other thing is you are given the diagnosis by your colleague so that you are not able to reason for yourself, and you end up getting wrong findings. You're not synthesizing. We have been maintaining social distancing for too long from our patients, and maybe we are using screen more than the face, and we have got disuse, atrophy of physical findings. All this is okay. But what you are fixed in the exam is when your findings don't fit with your reasonings. So lack of application is a primary problem with the exam. That means you are not thinking hard enough. You have to think, if you say this versus that, so therefore it should be like that. So that is the only thing asked from you in terms of exam, that your findings should be fitting with your rationalization. And if you are honestly taking your own arguments, you generally don't go wrong. Yes, there are many times there are traps which are clear in retrospect that, oh, we thought this, but it turned out to be that. And sensitivity and specificity of these findings, which one should be able to argue. So examiners sometimes ask you why there is no RV-S3 if you think there is right heart failure. So S3 is not present all the time. So sensitivity specificity of S3 is 70% or something like that. So in hierarchy of reasoning, you must be able to reason it correctly. So patient has syncope, so that gets a higher order of reasoning than some other symptoms like that. So what I mean to say that all physical findings or history and story has to be looked at it in terms of a totality of picture, and everything should make sense with every other thing. And that is only asked from you. You can argue on your own finding. Most of the time, even examiners disagree in their findings. So that is not a problem. But you must rationalize correctly. And if you practice, you will be surprised how often you are right in picking up simple clinical auscultatory diagnosis. So at the end of each case, you are asked what is PVH, pH severity. And you know the classification of mild, moderate, severe pH. And you are supposed to make a guess. Now PVH, we don't find a direct evidence other than history of dyspnea or presence of third heart sound. pH, we back compute from PVH and a finding of loud P2. So suppose you have a mild PVH, so your PA pressures are, PA pulmonary wedge pressures are maybe 17, 18. Now diastolic pressure gradient minimum has to be there 5 or so. So mild PVH patient automatically will have mild pH patient. So you cannot diagnose mild PVH, no pH like that. So that kind of reasoning you must make clear in your own mind. There are two clinical cases which often comes in exam where you can tell the LA pressure exactly by JVP. Because in AST, the RA LA pressures are same. So in an AST patient, you know the LA pressure. In a CCP patient, RA and LA are within 5 millimeters of each other. So you know the LA pressure and you can compute according to PVH, pH, just by the way. So now we go to some of the physical findings that we see when we end up with a patient of pH. See, I am talking at leisure. Anytime you feel that it is getting late, you can probably tell me, or you can tell Dr. Mohit. So when we have a patient, although it is adults, Down syndrome. So question, can the Down syndrome patient have pH in absence of a heart disease? We know that heart disease and pH is very common in Down and they occur early. Without heart disease, do they have pH? Yes, very much because of several things, because the lungs are not well developed, because there is obstructive sleep apnea, because there are recurrent aspirations, because fundamentally the lung development is an issue. We don't often realize that rhesopathies like Noonan's and neurofibromatosis also rarely have pH. Patients with Williams syndrome can have pH, central pH, that means RV is facing high load, but because of bilateral pulmonary artery stenosis, periphery is not actually pH, or sometimes they can have pH also. Now, sarcoidosis patient, very rare, but because adult cardiology, we often see sarcoid. So tattoo have a sarcoid, cutaneous sarcoid, and such patient can have pH from many causes. Metabolic syndromes, Pickwick syndrome, high obesity, heart failures have pH. Varicose veins, deep venous thrombosis, past history of some accidents, pH. Sickle cell disease, venous ulcers, pH. Some of the hand-heart syndromes, Holter-Arm, like they have pH. So many syndromes would be having pH. So we notice the physical findings, and patient at high altitude, native highlanders staying above 3,000 meters, develop polycythemia, hypoxia, vasoconstriction, heart failure, some of them. So chronic mountain sickness. So all in all, we have to look at the patient in a holistic fashion and not only look into the, what is mitral stenosis or or constricted pericarditis. So we take a look of the general physical findings, and actually Brownwood has written one of the major problem of current cardiology is that cardiologists have stopped looking at other systems. We have become too over specialized, and that is one reason why we make clinical errors also. So patient might be having cirrhosis and signs of liver cell failure with PH, hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia, usually pulmonary AV fistula, but sometimes PH also, upper airway obstructions, PH, differential cyanosis. What is the cause of differential cyanosis? PDA, PH. How often PDA, PH have no differential cyanosis? It is 20 to 30% of PDA, PH, right to left, will have no differential cyanosis. Why that happens? Either the right pulmonary, right subclavian is coming below the aorta, or the PVRI is so high that the blood, the desaturated blood is getting mixed with the aortic bloods, or their patient may have a VST also. So it is not always that there is a differential cyanosis in PDA, PH, but yes, if you find a differential cyanosis, diagnosis of PDA, PH is secure. Sclerodactyly PSS, patient can have PH. COPD patient, sometimes we don't see COPD on examination, we see it only in the X-ray. And we should never forget the lung disease as a cause of PH, and we will discuss that subsequently. It is surprising that continuous murmur on the lungs is really common with pulmonary thromboembolism, and it is a sign of thromboembolism if there is no congenital peripheral pulmonary stenosis. And I have seen patients like that where you have put a stethoscope on periphery, there is a continuous murmur, and on retrospect, patient is found to have thromboembolic PH. ECG is very briefly. ECG is not sensitive because right ventricle is small, left ventricle is normal. So by the time PH develops, right ventricle has to be really hypertrophied. So right ventricle hypertrophy is developed. It's a sign of developed PH, not a screening tool. Several things in right atrial hypertrophy, RVH. If there is a QR in RVH, the Q means suprasystemic pressure. Tall R in RVH means tall R in V1 means severe RVH. Now patient have atrial fibrillation. In patient of atrial fibrillation, can we say that right atrium is enlarged? So how do we see right atrium enlargement in atrial fibrillation? Exam question. By presence of Q in V1, but with a small r, and a tall R in V2. So ECG is important, right axis deviation, right atrial hypertrophy. Another one with tall R in V1 and right axis. This one I have specifically brought for you from a very old book on myocardial infarction. Should you find yourself diagnosing inferior MI, that means Q in 3 and AVF, and enteroseptal MI simultaneously, Q in V1, V2, think of pulmonary embolism. This is from Goldman's inferior MI, Goldman's ECG on myocardial infarction. So Q in 3 AVF and Q also in V1, V2 should make you suspect pulmonary embolism. S1, Q3, T3 is very well known to all of you. So stress in the V1, V2. And sometimes what is forgotten is S, the type C RVH. That means deep S in V1 to V6. So this is type C RVH, posterior loop, occasionally seen in COPD patients. This also suggests RVH. So much for ECG of RVH. What about X-rays? X-ray gives you a lot of information, but when you analyze the X-ray, you have to distinguish between PVH, pH, plethora, secondary cardiac effects, and the clues, etiology of pH if there are there in X-rays. So let us quickly see one by one. How do you distinguish vein from artery in an X-ray? Veins generally take course towards left atrium. Veins and arteries are generally equal ratio, fundamentally. Veins are little larger in the lower lobes, normally, and arteries will generally go towards the hilum. Veins will generally go towards the left atrium. So prominent veins in the lower lobes are signs of PVH. So constricted lower lobes and upper lobe higher, mild PVH, then interstitial edema, moderate PVH, and severe PH means dilated right pulmonary artery, more than 16 in men, more than 15 in women, and you know that. So pruning. What is pruning? Normally, pulmonary vessels are seen up to the 2 centimeter of the peripheral lung fields. If the pulmonary vessels stop beyond earlier than that, then we say pulmonary arteries are pruned. So there is a dilated central pulmonary artery and constricted peripheral pulmonary artery, or peripheral or first order branches are constricted. Now, can pruning occur in functional PH, or pruning is a sign of organic disease? Pruning is very much a part of functional PH also. So pruning by itself does not mean organic changes. So you could have PVH with the constricted lower lobes and dilated upper lobes, interstitial edemas and hilar haze and pulmonary edema, curly lines. You could have PH, dilated central pulmonary arteries, and peripheral pruning. So evidence of a congenital heart disease by way of telltale evidence of pulmonary plethora. That means end-on vessels more than 5 in both lung fields would indicate a congenital heart disease, a left to right shunt. It is important because this telltale evidence can persist even when the PH comes. Like this patient previously had a large left to right shunt, now is on Eisenmenger, but the sign of telltale evidence of plethora is persisting. So dilated main pulmonary artery, dilated right pulmonary artery. In a child, you can compare them with the bronchus or with the trachea. So pulmonary artery is dilated in a child when it is larger than the trachea. And the right ventricle is seen on the lateral X-ray when it is causing more than 1/3 of the sternal, or whether it's touching more than 1/3. This one is little less emphasized, and I think it's a good sign. Suppose the hylar shadows in the lung. That means from hilum to hilum, it is more than 44% of internal thoracic diameter. It's a specific sign of PH, little less emphasized. This sign of right atrial enlargement is also less emphasized. See, people talk of right atrium enlarged when there's more than 2.5 this way and that way. A better sign is this, that right atrium is enlarged if the A is more than B. That means the right atrium, the distance from here to the SVC-RA junction is more than distance from SVC-RA junction to the upper arch of aorta. So this line is upper arch of aorta, this line is SVC-RA junction. If this distance is bigger than this distance, RA enlargement is suggested, and that is a better sign. Now, what are these? These are typical spots. You can say Epstein's, and you can say PSTR. So you have peripherally black lung and very poor flow. That's simple. Now, what is this? Looks like peripheral black lung, but you see through the art, you can see dilated pulmonary artery. So this particular patient is severe PH. You can see the dilated PH on CT. See again, so sometimes you have to see through the heart, and this is actually PH, it's not PS. See this X-ray, dilated main pulmonary artery, but RP is pitted off. And you see the CT, the RP is pitted off because of a thromboembolic PH. So this is a poor man's CT showing the thromboembolic PH. If you are open-minded, you can pick up like this. What is this? A large heart, and this patient is bilateral peripheral PH. So lungs are actually showing very less flow, and central PH on echo, TR is high velocity. It was actually misdiagnosed as PH till you realize that it was bilateral peripheral PH. This is another patient which shows large heart, PVH and PH. And so there are some signs of increased pulmonary blood flow, some end-on vessels, some PVH also. So this was a combination of ASD with mitral stenosis. Patient of Lutembecher syndrome, a favorite exam case. So I would suggest that you read this article, British Heart Journal 1971. Professor Khalilullah will remember this. This is a beautiful article on Eisenmenger on Lutembecher syndrome, which will clarify a lot of thoughts and how to approach a Lutembecher. So highly recommended. What is this? PH. Now, cardiologist often doesn't pick up this. This is cystic fibrosis. So serious lung diseases, which we must not forget. Just one small point I missed, so I'll go back again. See this case, I just flipped through this. One thing of PVH which will create problem in exam also. Another cause of PVH which is not commonly understood by cardiologists is emphysema. COPD regularly causes upper lobe redistribution. It is physiology of the body to redirect the blood where it is not useful. In emphysema, regularly you find the upper lobe vessels are more than the lower lobe vessels. So it is a sign of emphysema, not PVH. So if you see flat diaphragm, otherwise COPD, and upper lobe prominent, it need not necessarily mean PVH. So we have to integrate pulmonary information from chest X-ray, information from everywhere else. Just two comments on echo, because all of you are very good in echo. So echo tricuspid regurgitation is easily obtainable, and it correlates with the RV systolic pressure in the absence of PS. So what is the difference between this TR and this TR? Both are severe PH patients, for example. So this is obviously a low dP by dt. So this is RV dysfunction with TR, because the rate of rise of, you can calculate dP by dt from this, and you have RV dysfunction. Now another question, when do you have PH with the RV velocity of 2 meters only? So you have RV saying 2 meters, but patient is PH. 2 to 4 into 2 is about what, 16, 18? When can then still mean PH? So that could still mean PH if the RA pressure is 30. So that to still translate to PH. But one more thing which is often forgotten is that when you have a free TR, suppose you have a very large free non-turbulent TR, then this Bernoulli theorem 4V square is just not applicable. For example, a large Epstein or a very severe florid unguarded tricuspid regurgitation, you cannot estimate TR by 4V square, and this is often missed. When you look at the outflow Doppler, these are very nice things. that nowadays we are able to see the acceleration time and guess that the PA pressures are not very high. So if the acceleration times comes less than 105, we say PA pressures, pulmonary vascular disease is set in. So this is normal PA flow, and this is abbreviated PA flow. Interestingly, people say that if you find a notch in the RV, in the PA Doppler, that is suggestive of post-capillary, the suggestive pre-capillary pH. That means some notch like this is telling you that the pulmonary vascular resistance is high. Now, these are not very well verified things, but it is good to look at these things, that if you look at the acceleration time from onset of acceleration to the peak, onset of PA acceleration to the peak, less than 105 means PVR is raised, and notch means PVR is raised. If there is abbreviated pulmonary Doppler flow, it is a sign of a PVR raise. So when you see a shunt patient, a BST, AST, also pay attention to how good is the flow in the lungs, in the pulmonary artery by way of this, and that is helpful. Many other tests are required. What about PFT? Cardiologists should have some working knowledge of PFT, if not too much. DLCO is very useful for primary pulmonary hypertension, because if the lungs are not very bad, if the CT is not terrible, but if your DLCO is low, if the patient's DLCO is low, it goes a long way to suggest that this is primary pulmonary hypertension, very likely. In a setting of suspected IPH, if the DLCO is very, very low, that is again suggestive of a venocapillary, veno-occlusive disease and capillary hemangiomatosis. What is the ABG of a patient with IPH, would you think? PCO2 in IPH patient is usually a little low than normal because of chronic hyperventilation, and that is useful. CT goes all the way to diagnose so many things. Ventilation perfusion scan is supposedly the drug of a choice for CT for thromboembolic PH. Cardiopulmonary exercise testing is another thing which we just don't pay any attention, and just for the sake of physiology, this is very important. It will be useful. We will spend a minute on that later. Uric acid is somehow raised in patient with primary pulmonary hypertension. It's not very markedly raised, but it is raised fundamentally as a part and parcel of the disease. When the vessels are showing those changes, somehow the xanthine oxidase is more activated on those vessels, and it gives rise to uric acid. It is supposed to prognosticate patient also. And catheterization is needed whenever you are in doubt, whenever you want to plan therapy, whenever you want to see the vasculature reactivity, etc. Time doesn't permit to get into all these details. Now I will show you something a little more interesting diseases from point of view of exam. So here you go. You have a tracing and a patient whose PA pressures are about 50 mean. So what would this data suggest to you? I hope you are seeing the full screen, that the saturation is on the other side. So in such a patient, you have been given a LVED and a PA wedge. You find hardly there is any gradient between the two. And actually this shows a big step up. So there is a pH and a big step up and no gradient. And patient SVC saturation is only 50-ish. So mixed venous saturation of 50 means patient is very sick. Now why should he be so sick if there is just an ASD? So patient was basically having a step up suggestive of an ASD. His RA and LA pressures are nearly equal, so he may be having an ASD with a step up. So it was ASD with mitral stenosis. And the mitral stenosis in this instance is just not picked up by gradient because of the large hole. So this is one setting where you could miss a mitral stenosis. So what are the other causes of silent MS? So patient of silent MS regularly would come as PH case. You diagnose silent MS, one diagnoses silent MS only in presence of a gross TR or in setting of an ASD MS. So you have to have a right ventricle forming the apex. Otherwise, most of the time you are able to hear a mitral stenosis murmur, except for emphysema or thick chest, and not talking of those. So you don't diagnose silent MS just empirically. To diagnose silent MS, one should have a gross TR, RV apex, and things like that. So if you talk of mitral stenosis, let us say, what is the pulmonary vascular resistance in mitral stenosis patient? In a mitral stenosis patient, you have a wedge pressure of, say, let us say 30. What will be the PVRI? And what is the pathological finding in? What if you see the lung on a unfortunate autopsy of mitral stenosis? What shall we find? You can jot your answers. So mitral stenosis patients are of two types. Some of them have just no raised PVRI. That means whatever is the LA pressure is reflected in the pulmonary diastolic pressure. Diastolic pressure gradient is not very high. Whereas there are some reactors in which you have regularly seen patient with mitral stenosis suprasystemic PA pressures. So what is their PVRI? Their PVRI goes in the range of 25, 27, 30 even, or anything. So they are not garden variety. And what happens to this PVRI once we open the mitral valve? In other words, what is the pathology finding in the lungs? If it was irreversible, it would not come down. whereas we regularly find, for all practical purposes, it by and large settles down. There is one study from Chitra which says a few percentage, maybe 10%, it does not settle down. So the pathological changes in mitral stenosis do not go to grade 5 or 6. By and large, you only find grade 3 and like that. So plexiform changes, necrotizing arteritis are not there. So therefore, even a very severe PH could also regress, generally speaking. Similar things happen with the left heart disease. Left heart disease is very important to understand because it is probably the commonest cause of pulmonary hypertension world over. So when we say wedge pressure of more than 15 or LVED is more than 15, we have to remember that wedge and LVED generally correlates. So this is a study showing in 1,000 patients. The correlation is not perfect. It correlates very often, but you cannot take for granted that every time it is right. So there are some reasons why wedge may not correlate with LVED, and one should be wary of that. Sometimes the wedge is different in different segments, but more often than that, one is not able to wedge correctly, or there is a reason for a disproportionate change in LVED and PA wedge. Also, when we measure wedge by digitization, sometimes the wedge pressures are showing different. If you take a computerized meeting and sometimes you see manually, it is different. So for example, here, if you take a digitized wedge, it will show you for a kind of a raised wedge, which we will say maybe post-capillary pH. Whereas if you took them at manually, you would have said something different. So where do we take a wedge pressure? We take wedge pressure at the end expiration manually, if possible. When do we take digitized wedge pressure? When there are too much fluctuation, when the patient is in AF, maybe you can take digitized mean. So when the wedge or LVED is more than 15, we think of a post-capillary PH or a left heart causing disease. Now see the patient. There was a patient with a PA mean of 50 and a wedge of 20. We say it's a left heart disease. He received diuretics for few days and his wedge fell down to 11 and his PA pressure also fell down, became something within the range. So where shall we classify him? So one should be mindful of the fact that diuresis can change the wedge pressures. So converse of it is, suppose we give a fluid load, a challenge, how much wedge pressure rises in a normal. So if you give a 500 ml fluid in a normal person, the PA wedge does not go above 16. So I think 18 mm or beyond wedge would be sign of a LV diastolic dysfunction. So these are evolving concepts. So when we think of a left heart disease, we have to again think like that. In some patients, okay, so when we have a diastolic dysfunction and normal ejection fraction, see, we all know this DCM and raised pressures are understandable. When we don't have DCM, when we LV function normal, in India, we don't see too much of preserved heart failure, whereas the literature only talks of preserved heart failure and PH. So question to you is, how much PA pressure you think you can see in patient with diastolic dysfunction? What is the quantum of PAH in a pure diastolic dysfunction? And you will be surprised to know that it is almost as much as IPH patient. So just by seeing the number, we cannot distinguish. So PA pressure could be as bad in diastolic dysfunction as in idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. And there are two types of patients, just like mitral stenosis. Suppose you have a LA pressure of 25. In some patient, a 25 LA translates into 25 or 30, a wedge diastolic 26 only, and a PA pressure of 47. So PVRI here is 1 or 2, RA mean is 5, RV function is all right. Same patient, for some reason, disproportionately show you a vasoconstriction. So in response to a capillary pressure of 25, his diastolic goes up to 30, his systolic goes to 65, his PVRI is 7, and his RV fails in face of that load. So you could have a similar patient with a normal LV function, either just a simple PH post-capillary or a reactive component to it with a pre-capillary component, which means the patient in the lungs in that patient shows a pulmonary vascular disease. Whether the therapy of these two could be different is not very well worked out. Currently, we don't think that giving a pulmonary vasodilator is helpful in such patients. So this is an area of interest. Why this patient, some of these patients show this, also not very well worked out. Maybe there are genetic differences, maybe they are triggered by something. We are running out of time. You can tell me when to stop, but this is something which I think examining people want. So congenital heart disease is, we need to talk. When you have a patient of congenital heart disease and you are thinking of PH, P2 is most important. You have either PS or a PH or a normal PA pressure, neither PS nor PH. So when you have cyanosis without any PH, you think of pulmonary fistulas, your second sound is normal, and there may be evidence of pulmonary pulmonary AV fistula on echo. Problem is with the distinguishing between PS and PH. And when you have PH, distinguishing between hyperkinetic and obstructive. And very often you get an ASD patient in exam. And remember that in ASD, identifying PA pressure in ASD is difficult because P2 cannot tell you the pH. So how do you go about this? So you have an ASD patient who is blue. And you know there are several causes of cyanosis in an ASD without pH. For example, unroofed coronary sinus, large ASD, streaming because of a valve, inferior MI causing RV dysfunction, and others. So cyanosis in an ASD cannot be taken as an evidence of pH. Loud P2 alone cannot be taken as an evidence of pH. So how do we go about it? So we look at the flow rumble. If there is a good ASD flow rumble on the second intercostal space, or a tricuspid flow rumble because of an ASD, so that tells you that there is a good flow going on. Now that patient will be having only hyperkinetic pH. Now if you don't have a flow rumble, neither in the base nor in the tricuspid flow rumble, then there is no good flow of ASD. And if he has a pH, then it should not be a hyperkinetic pH, it should be obstructive pH. What happens when the patient is mitral stenosis? Because of mitral stenosis, the flow across the ASD is increased. Just as because of hypertension, the flow across the ASD is increased. So they have a good flow murmur at the base. They have a good flow murmur at the tricuspid rumble, sometimes not audible in adults. But if it is there, it really helps. So when you find a good flow murmur across the second space in a wide fixed second heart sound, you think of an ASD. Now such a patient also has a thrill. So if you have a thrill across the second intercostal space, what are the differential diagnoses? Either it is a large flow ASD because of whatever reasons, or patient have associated valvular PS mild, left to right, or patient has got a mitral valve disease, maybe MS or MR. So a large flow in ASD can happen because of these things, and you have to take that into account. Now let me ask you again, if you have a large flow ASD like that, a thrill probably, wide fixed second sound, tricuspid flow murmur, and patient is blue. So what is it? So such a patient could be having a TAPVC with a good flow. Now is that TAPVC operable or not operable? Because there are good flow murmurs, it is operable TAPVC. Now same patient, if he would have developed Eisenmengerization, the flow murmur would have gone and his cyanosis would have deepened. His second sound split would have become narrow. So narrow split second sound, no flow murmurs would be PAH. Now Eisenmengerization in ASD is minority. PAH we say when we talk about thrill and cyanosis. So you have a cyanos patient, whether it's a PS physiology or Eisenmenger physiology. How do you decide? Remember, a deeply cyanosed patient, very deeply cyanosed patient is generally not Eisenmengerization. Eisenmengerization are blue, but not very, very blue till very late in their disease. Parasternal heave is absent in both. Tricuspid regurgitation is absent in both. Whether it's a tetralogy situation or Eisenmenger situation, they do not have parasternal heave, they do not have TR. Second sound is single in both. An ejection click could be present in both. In both, it could be a constant ejection click. So therefore, sometimes it becomes a good exam case. Now, the murmur would vary. In a tetralogy situation, a faint murmur means very low forward flow and therefore a very severe cyanosis. So very blue fellow with a very loud murmur cannot be a tetralogy. Very blue fellow with a very faint murmur is okay for a tetralogy. If you have a diastolic murmur in a sinus setting, if it's a high-pitched diastolic murmur like AR murmur, then you know it's a high-pressure PA and there is a P pulmonary regurg. So you may be having a PDA, Eisenmenger, or you could have a AR. You have to go for a palpable pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery is palpable. So palpable pulmonary artery is the only thing, but if you have palpable pulmonary artery, that means a palpation in the second space, there is one caveat. And what is that caveat? Some of the congenital heart disease, for example, corrected transposition, aorta is there. So how do you distinguish a palpable aorta from a palpable pulmonary artery? A corrected transposition aorta palpable usually is a little higher, a little lateral. And once the possibility of corrected transposition is kept, other things fall in place. So by and large, a palpable pulmonary artery, lack of murmur, and a mild cyanosis will favor a Eisenmenger. And parasternal heave will be minimum. Now, when they start getting TR, they can get pulmonary, or they have severe volume load for whatever reason, AR, PR, then they can get a parasternal heave also. So you have a Eisenmenger could be a VSD, ASD, or PDA. I hope none of you now think that VSD Eisenmenger is first decade, second decade, third decade. All that is completely incorrect. Eisenmengerization happens. This we have repeated n number of times. Eisenmengerization happens very early in life. Patient may present. This was Paul Wood wrote in his article that they presented in such and such decade, but that does not mean Eisenmengerization happens like that. All congenital heart disease patients, onset of Eisenmengerization is very early, and they must be operated in the infancy or before 2 years of age. Just for completion, 50% of VSDs get Eisenmengerized, 10 to 20% of ASDs might get Eisenmengerized. What is a large VSD? When it is larger than aortic, and they only get Eisenmengerized. What is a large PDA? About 8 millimeter, and a large ASD is beyond 2 centimeter. PDA VSD Eisenmengerization do not develop heart failure till very late, whereas pre-tricuspid ASD develops heart failure even earlier. So in a ASD patient, the PA pressure need not be systemic. It may be subsystemic, and patient may still develop heart failure because the septum is intact, because the RV alone faces the load. Whereas he could be there in ASD. And the second sound is the whole key. Single second sound means VSD, split second sound means PDA Eisenmenger, and fixed narrow second sound means ASD. Now this thing also has limitations. You could quote that not every PDA had a normal split second sound, not every VSD had a single second sound, but for all practical purposes, it works this way, and it generally is okay. Generally, PR is a sign of dilated PA, more often seen in PDA, and that PR patient in a PDA could have wide collapsing, wide pulse outside, masquerading as TR, and that as we discussed. So this is one X-ray which I would like to show you. Can you suspect Eisenmenger on this X-ray? There is no history of increased LRTI in childhood. So what is this? Remember, 10% of Eisenmenger can present with a case first as Eisenmenger. That means they never went through lowering of PAH in childhood, recurrent heart failure. So that means a persistent fetal circulation could happen in isolated patient, about 10%, and therefore they could present first time as an adult, but they are Eisenmenger. So this is such case, persistent fetal circulation sometimes. This is useful in your analysis of history. X-rays can distinguish between VSD, PD, and Eisenmenger and ASD Eisenmenger. Very large dilated PAs with a small aorta, and a dilatation at the site of PDA, maybe a calcification. So calcification in PA means Eisenmenger, calcification in the duct means a patent duct with increased PA pressures and the like. So what are these X-rays showing? So this was a PD patient with the Eisenmenger, but had a telltale evidence of increased pulmonary vasculature. So you could say this PH because of Eisenmenger. Now this is also Sinus patient. Can you notice anything abnormal? There's a right aortic arch. So right aortic arch means with the increased pulmonary blood flow, right aortic arch is truncus unless proved otherwise. This patient was a trunk, but there is no RPA. Usually in a trunk with a right aortic arch, you will have a high fall high from PA. So abnormal PA origin would be generally seen. So remember, right pulmonary right arch with the increased pulmonary blood flow, truncus, and that often comes as an exam case. And patient will have truncal regurgitation, a large heart, which will masquerade as a AR also. And that AR will be in the RV, so that you might have a thrill. Now I can't stop without telling you about lung disease PAH, because on a population level, lung disease is the commonest cause of PAH, and lung disease is so common that we must know something about it. So here are 5-6 important factors about lung disease. Remember, parenchymal lung disease, a lot of destruction is needed. 80% destruction of parenchyma is needed to produce mean PA pressure more than 25 at rest. Up to 50% destruction is needed for increasing PA pressure on exercise. So it is not sufficient to say little bit of aspiration, little bit of LRTA component as cause of PAH. Now, COPD patients, majority of them have a mean PA pressure of 20, but only 3 to 5% have a mean PA pressure of 35 to 40. That means serious PAH is usually not a problem of COPD. Most of them, which we used to call it as pink puffers. PAH progresses in these patients slowly. More PAH is seen in patients with pulmonary fibrosis, or in those cases where there is more of combined pulmonary fibrosis and emphysema. How do you define severe PAH in lung disease? Because we found that lung disease, when they have even mild PAH or moderate PAH, their prognosis is worse. So severe PAH is in patient with the lung disease is defined as mean PA pressure more than 35 and not more than 50 as we normally do. So worse mortality is seen in people with severe PAH and lung disease together. So much so for lung disease. When we put the patient on exercise, a normal person, his VO2 max reaches more than 80%. He should reach target heart rate more than 80%. And his ventilation should not reach. So if the ventilation reaches the target, reaches the highest possible, then it is a lung disease. So if the ventilation is the limiting factor, then it's a lung disease. If the anaerobic threshold comes earlier, then it is also a heart disease. And if the saturation falls, then it may be a lung disease. So when you put a patient of dyspnea with a mixture of things through cardiopulmonary exercise test, I think we should have some basic physiological grounding on this. Unfortunately, we are running out of time and I can't go into details of this. Just broadly remember, if the anaerobic threshold comes early, if the VO2 max is not reached in time, they are signs of heart disease, because generally heart is the limiting organ for exercise. When ventilation becomes limiting for exercise, that means ventilation threshold is reached, it is lung. When there is a desaturation, it is lung. When the PCO2 rises, it is lung. And the variation of the same thing. Okay, what is the cause of PAH in him? This is from 1957 circulation. Very early days when, so obesity can cause cardiomyopathy, reversible restrictive cardiomyopathy. Obesity can cause sleep apnea. Obesity can cause reactive pulmonary vascular disease. Obesity have high output heart failure. And surprisingly, obesity can also give you pre-capillary vascular disease like type 1 PAH. So any of this is possible. And metabolic syndrome and the restrictive heart disease that we just discussed is all applicable. So you can see how complex it can become. Now I have bored you enough. Maybe it's a couple of interesting cases. I'm sure you will like this. And this is important from point of view of real life. And I cannot stop it without telling you this. Now here is the case data earlier on in my career, 25 years ago. So PA mean, this is a VST patient. PA mean 70, we cathed him and the TPR was 18. You give oxygen and the TPR fell to 5. Now day in, day out, we see such patients because of misunderstanding of oxygen studies. People do not appreciate this, that there was a resting shunt which is small, the PVR is very high. Whenever you have a very plummeted fall in PVR, this is not real. Half of the time it is because you did not calculate the dissolved oxygen. Actually, this is a topic by itself. But just for completing PAH in congenital heart disease, if your baseline PVR is very high and if it plummets with oxygen, you do not get this patient operated thinking of these numbers. These numbers are not real. Because this patient came after VST closure and he was worse off. As you know, Eisenmengers are better than a closed VST if they develop PVR, develop severe pulmonary vascular disease. But having said that, there is another patient, similar PVR at 32, dropped to 5 on oxygen, and we operated on him and he was very well. The difference is that his cath data, this is done elsewhere, his cath data was showing a desaturation which was not there normally. So he was not desaturated at rest, but he developed desaturation in cath data, in cath table because of hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction, something went wrong. So his ECG was, his cardiomegaly was there, he has LV dilatation on ECG. So he was eminently operable and we did operate and did not mess. So hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction can give you severe PVRI, and that is only one setting where oxygen study can be useful or a vascular vasoreactivity could be useful. How do we test vasoreactivity in the cath lab? A big question by itself. And I think some other day we can discuss, but just if you have a PDA with pH, because everybody is fond of device closures, we put a balloon, we close, see the defect and see the change in the PA pressure. If the PA pressure falls, then we say we should close the PDA. But many of these PDAs could come back with the worsening of PA pressure, and then you close the PDA and you then try to do a pot shunt on him. That will not be good. So there has to be substantial fall in PA. I repeat, there has to be substantial fall in PA pressure to be able to say that this is operable. If the fall in PA pressure is less than 50% of system pressure, you may have a problem at your hand, and you have to take into account many things like the age of the patient, the quantum of shunt, and things like that. So this is not a fully worked out area, but don't be in a hurry to put a device if the PA pressure just falls a little bit. So patient has a PVR of 20. The patient has got a PDA, is 8-year-old, and his PA pressure is 90 with PVR of 26, which on oxygen becomes 19. Could he be ever operable? His aortic saturation is 66. Should he be operated? Have a look again. PA 90, PVRI 26, drop to 19. Just now we said resting PVR high, we should not operate. And we operated on this patient because he was mitral stenosis also. So when you have a wedge pressure, there is a secondary changes and they are reversible. So any patient with left to right shunt and mitral stenosis is operable if the MS is severe. Because the back pressure changes somehow prevent them from developing severe Eisenmenger changes. Not too many cases are like that. But remember, a post-capillary pH has a protective effect. And this patient was well. Now lungs are in parallel. So another patient with a PA mean of 95 and a FA of 85. Should we operate? Now he had a stenosis at the, he had a right pulmonary artery which is stenosed. So pressure in the right lung is normal, pressure in the left lung is high. So in the lungs, as long as you have one normal lung, as long as the PVRI in one lung is normal, if you connect the two, your final PVRI will be normal. So in any case, if you have one normal PVRI, you will have an operable patient. So despite a high PVA pressure, when we connect the two PA, his PA pressure fell and patient was eminently operable. So this is a very rare case, just bringing it out because it is showing you some physiological insights into the lung vasculature. A IPH patient, 30-year-old lady, everything is like IPH. Remember, thromboembolic PH presents just like IPH. There is no thing in the story which you can distinguish the two, except sometimes you can have stuttering events. Sometimes you have a background, reason to think. So this patient had a severe thromboembolic PH, and after a pulmonary endarterectomy, you can see right pulmonary artery got recruited better. Left pulmonary artery was also recruited in parts, and the PA pressure did fall, and patient is very much better. So as far as CTEPH is concerned, remember most patient, majority of the patient do not give atrial pulmonary embolism. Acute pulmonary embolism leads to CTEPH in less than 5%. Which are these patients where the majority of the pulmonary embolism gets cured by itself, gets organized by itself? We thought 5, maybe 5, maybe 10, but why this patient develop CTEPH is not very well known. Very interesting point I would like to bring out here is that in a CTEPH patient, we think that the lung is obstructed or lung is there. Now you open this artery and the vessels here, the vessels distal to obstruction also show vasculopathy. So vessels which are not obstructed get high blood flow and show some kind of vasculopathy. But vessels which are obstructed also show some vasculopathy. So therefore, it becomes very difficult to decide which patient will benefit, which patient will not benefit. And this is a matter for serious consideration. Which are the risk factors for CTEPH? Dysfibrinogenemia, post-splenectomy. Somehow patients who have no spleen tend to get into CTEPH, tend to get into PH also. But protein C, protein S are not indicator of PEH. Another CTEPH. Now this patient did not have CTEPH, but he had a Takayasu arteritis. Takayasu arteritis on a CT can completely masquerade a thromboembolic PH picture because it is an arteritis after all. This patient had a past tuberculosis and had fibrosing mediastinitis. So similar arteritis can masquerade as CTEPH, remember that. IgG4 disease, nothing is complete nowadays without talking about IgG4. IgG4 related arteritis also can masquerade as CTEPH, so worth keeping in mind. A patient of PH treated as epilepsy because every night she would throw a seizure. When we did a polysomnography, we recognized that these are episodes of severe hypoxia in a PH patient. So after putting her on home oxygen therapy, these events completely stopped. So sometimes sleep apnea, sleep studies are also part of PH gathering. And finally, a boy with 70 PA pressure, pulmonary contrast echo showing pulmonary fistula, and the patient had a portopulmonary shunt, Abernethy syndrome. I think you all know that whenever the portal blood bypasses the liver and goes into the lung directly, patient can develop hepatopulmonary syndrome, patient can become cyanosed, or patient can develop PH. And should you be able to close this fistulae or able to treat them, the PH can regress. Now all of them are not treatable, and this is a matter for refined reading. Such patients, when they don't get portal blood into the lungs, they also develop hepatocellular nodules and hepatic carcinomas. So mind a patient of liver disease and think for PH in them. Now, should you have a normal liver function test, but a raised ammonia, a patient who has an encephalopathy history, think of Abernethy syndrome, think of portosystemic bypass. And you have an IPH-like patient, but he had ground glass opacities on CT and he is rapidly deteriorating. His DLCO is very low, 30–40% of normal. So think of a CT X-ray like that in a PH patient. There is pulmonary venous hypertension. So PVOD patient. So what is the wedge pressure in a PVOD patient? Once the patient has got a pulmonary venous obstruction, the wedge pressure is also normal, contrary to popular belief, because the veins get occluded. So if you take them on cath table, you find a normal wedge pressure. But they have a PVH on X-rays on CT, they have septal lines, they have a lymphadenopathy on the septum, and they have ground glass appearances. And the two disorders which are very similar to each other, veno-occlusive disease and a capillary hemangiomatosis, they are not for a pulmonary vasodilator therapy. They deteriorate after pulmonary vasodilator therapy and they have a very poor prognosis. Now we talk of pulmonary hypertension, pulmonary pressures everywhere, but currently people are moving on that beyond pressures, it is the compliance of the pulmonary vasculature, which is also a factor for RV function. So nowadays there is a talk of pulmonary compliance beyond pulmonary pressures. And how do we measure compliance? It is very easy. You have pulmonary blood flow, total pulmonary blood flow divided by heart rate. That means each beat is contributing so much of pulmonary blood flow, so much of pulmonary flow to the lungs. Now each pulmonary stroke volume divided by pulse pressure. Systolic stroke volume of the lung, of the beat divided by pulse pressure. This is giving an idea of how compliant is the vasculature in general sense. And it is also correlating with the RV function. So it is a measure of RV afterload beyond pressure. Just keep that in mind, and we will hear more about this in coming times. I think I'm done. So we have not talked about hypertension, kidney disease. So just as a recap, if you have a boy with normal liver function but raised ammonia and pH, you will think of Abernethy malformation. If we have bruit over the lungs, we will think of CTE pH, also peripheral pulmonary stenosis congenital. You are worsening with pulmonary vasodilators, we'll think of pulmonary vascular disease or a capillary pulmonary hemangiomatosis. Newborn with persistent hypertension, mother was taking SSRI, cause of PPHN. Protein C deficiency can give you acute pulmonary embolism, but not CTE-PH. Episodic joint pains, sickle cell disease, had missing pulses, Takayasu causing PH. Patient had splenectomies, could be having any type of PH, maybe CTE-PH, maybe a primary pulmonary hypertension, maybe a liver disease. Native Highlanders, living in high altitude, chronic mountain sickness, subacute mountain sickness, etc., etc. Thank you for bearing with all this. I have finished. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Dr. Kothari.
Thank you so much, sir. Exceptionally good presentation, a prolonged presentation, and probably covering most of the part. And it was fantastic to hear. We also have, along with Dr. Isar and Dr. Tyagi, we also have Dr. Balbir Singh, President CSI, joining us. So we would like to hear comments, and then we go on to the questions. Though we know that you are very tired after almost 1.5 hours of long presentation.
Well, I'm sorry. I overtook the time, but
no, sir. It was fantastic. It was.
I think it was very interesting, and lifetime experience of a cardiologist was condensed in 1.5 hours. I think we should have more of your presentation. It was very educative, beyond the textbooks, which are not available. As everything practical, which can be condensed. And I think this type of series, I request Dr. Mohit to have more of such series from Dr. Kothari, so that we have more of clinical cardiology in this era of interventional cardiology.
Can I ask one question, please?
yes, please.
Please.
Thank you, Dr. Kothari, sir, for such a nice presentation regarding pulmonary hypertension. Actually, signs of Eisenmenger in simple shunt lesions in adults are not so difficult to find out. But what do you suggest in complex cyanotic heart disease in children developing pulmonary hypertension, PAH? What are the signs which suggest that they are developing? What are the indicators and hints on clinical examination in these
I think
children?
it's a very important question, and I'm sorry I could not do justice to this. So what we have to see, what we are looking at is it a obstructive lesion? That means, are the lung develop Eisenmengerization? So first thing is there a evidence of a shunt or not? See, the things, as you say, it becomes complex when you have a complex heart disease, because so suppose, for example, there is a transposition or there is a tricuspid atresia. So what we are looking is, we look at the pulmonary blood flow. Is there evidence of a shunt? So if there is evidence of a flow murmur, or if there is evidence of any murmur, so which is showing a sign of pulmonary flow without a soft P2. So if you have a soft P2, a delayed and soft P2 would mean there is no significant PH. So that is a PS group. Now, if you have a single second sound, or you have a split second sound with a loud P2, with a loud P2, you know the pH is there. In that patient, if there is a mild cyanosis, a flow rumble, then you know it is a hyperkinetic pH. Now, if that patient does not have, is severely blue and has no evidence of murmur, then you can vote for a pH or a transposition physiology. So you have to distinguish between two things. Is it a admixture lesion? That means a lesion like TAPVC or single ventricle, whether every blood flow is mixed today, or is it a transposition physiology? So if you simplify it again, evidence of a shunt, evidence of cardiomegaly without any other TR, MR accounting for it, means hyperkinetic pH with mild cyanosis. Very severely cyanosed, no evidence of a shunt murmur, a single second sound loud P2, you can say this Eisenmenger. But again, you have to take a total picture, and you have to keep in mind that in a patient who is transverse physiology will give much more cyanosis for the same degree of pH, and a patient with admixture lesion can also be blue, but still be having not Eisenmenger. So if a TAPVC patient may not be Eisenmenger, may be still blue, but has a split P2, which is not very loud. I hope I made some sense.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Balbir Singh, please, sir. Any comments?
Dr. Kothari, it was as usual a masterly presentation, and I really now think that how lucky are these DNB and DM candidates that they can hear such beautiful lectures, sit on and have a cup of tea like I was having, and listen you through. It is really lucky. We were not that lucky to hear, but you know, you were so good that I can't say anything more. In fact, I learned the definition of pH is 20 millimeter, not 25. I still practice 25. So excellent presentation.
Dr. Balbir, my only comment is you too, Brutus. You are not very different from me. So you too, Brutus is the only comment for you.
Thank you, sir. And Girish and I'll be speaking with some questions from the residents that we have got. And just for your information, sir, that 890 people had registered and we had more than 700 people at present who are online with us on this seminar. So this shows the interest of the residents that how much they are interested in listening. So one of the questions that expectedly come up is that, how to assess the operability of Eisenmenger clinically by examination by ECG also. And if you could just summarize it for the residents, because one of the commonly asked questions in exams.
Yeah. See, operability is a separate question by itself, and maybe one can talk about it again. So, what are we talking? Operability in Eisenmenger means, are we saying that are the changes in the lungs fixed or they are not so fixed? So, if you have evidence of a shunt on clinical examination, we are not very sure. So, there has to be some evidence of a shunt. Now, when we look at the ECG in that patient, we have some evidence of a shunt on ECG. That means there may be some Q waves in V5, V6 or left ventricular leads. Some evidence of Q, and the R is not very overriding. So if the ECG is no LVH, if the patient has no split, and if there is no cardiomegaly, at the clinical level, we think there is a patient may not be operable. So patient has to be blue, number one. So if it's borderline blue, so you go for saturation. What is the saturation at rest? In exam also, one can do a little bit of exercise and see how does it drop. So if it drops very markedly from 95 to 85 or 80, then we know that it is a fixed vasculature, except in AST. So in a patient of VST, AS, and PDA, you can see resting oximetry and put them on exercise oximetry. A very serious drop would mean non-operable. Look at the X-ray. The cardiomegaly in absence of TR would favor operability. ECG showing sign of a Q wave in V5, V6 and a sign of not severe RVH would mean also operability. And everything in exam, I think people make too much fuss about exam. It is not like that. You have to rationalize all the factors in particular case, and almost always the answer is there for that particular case which the examiner is asking. In that particular case, you will be finding, okay, the PR is there, so there is a loud diastolic rumble, which means PA pressures are very high, like that. So if you probably, my short answer would be that you have to look at everything holistically, evidence of continuous shunt on clinical examination. Severity of pulmonary hypertension, severity of cyanosis, on ECG and X-ray, signs of not fixed pH. So again, number of vessels seen on X-ray is not a sign of operability. You may have those because they lag behind. You could still have persistent signs of increased QP, but the patient may not be operable. And whenever in doubt, see, physical examination at the bedside cannot tell everything. So whenever in doubt, catheterize him. There is no harm in saying that I cannot decide and I will like to catheterize. And do not trade off soft sign for hard sign. Do not trade off ECG as a sign of operability when your cath data shows inoperability. Oxygen studies on operability on cath, etc. will need probably another session. I would like to see some good questions, Mohit. Are there any pinning questions which are making me realize that yes, they have understood?
Dr. Girish, you have so one of the is coming is what are the why generally the prognosis is Eisenmenger pH is better than the idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension?
Okay, so in Eisenmenger, see, the killing in these things is the heart. The lung do not kill. So why the heart becomes killing in Eisenmenger or in pH is when the RV function fails. And the RV, when there is a hole, the RV and LV works like one pump. But when we close that hole, the entire afterload is borne by right ventricle only, and therefore it fails. So as long as RV and LV are working as one pump, they are able to negotiate that much. And when you close that hole, RV fails. That is very easy. And it is very important to understand that we must not convert a left to right shunt, a borderline left to right shunt into primary pulmonary artery physiology, because then it will fail.
And so Dr. Nilesh and many other doctors are asking the same question, assessment of pulmonary arterial pressure with ECG, that we are repeatedly asked this thing in exam. So
okay.
4 or 5 doctors have given the same question.
Okay, so there are two issues to this. ECG assessment of PA pressure in a valvular PS is written in textbooks that you multiply R and V1 by 5 or you R into 3 plus 47, but this is only for PS patient. Do not confuse this for PA with PH patient. So in a valvular PS patient, R in V1 into 5 gives you a reasonable idea of a RV pressure. Same is not applicable in a pH setting. In a pH setting, if you have pure R in V1, it suggests systemic pressure. If you have a QR in V1, it suggests suprasystemic pressure. So pure R or R by S more than 1 suggests that RV is overload and then some pH is there. But if your pure R in V1 is systemic, QR is suprasystemic. I do not think you can give exact pressure anything beyond this.
Anemia per se cause pulmonary arterial hypertension, and if yes, then does it reverse by just managing the anemia?
What by itself? Arrhythmia?
Anemia.
Anemia. Very good question. See, anemia will cause what? Anemia will cause high output. A normal person output, an anemic person output is high output. Anemia can cause high output heart failure also. So when the patient has anemia, his output is going to be higher, and so therefore PA pressure will rise, but PVRI will not rise. So if you do calculate a PVRI in that patient, PVRI will be low normal, but in a patient of high output heart failure, certainly there can be heart failure. And you know the entity of, more and more people are now finding thiamine deficiency, B12 deficiency, or B1 deficiency, and vitamin pyruvate deficiency causing PH. In neonate, there are epidemics of PH. So they are all in heart failure, but they are in high output heart failure. So their PA pressures are high, but PVRI is not high. And if you treat the disease, it will go down. The converse of it is very important to understand that in a patient who is PAH and is in heart failure and is anemic, if you treat anemia, the cardiac output the need will come down and it will certainly improve. Now, when the patient is very blue, 22 gram, polycythemia causes high viscosity and worsens the pH. So polycythemic patient, inoperable patient with a hemoglobin of 20 to 23, we should do venesection to get it to a range where viscosity is less, so PVRI will fall. That will be useful.
There are many questions, but I think it's already 7:30, and we will mail many of the questions to you. And probably, Dr. Girish, if you have any other questions that you would like to put up in front of sir.
I think most of the questions, sir,
can I
already
ask
asked.
one more question? In many adults with idiopathic means pulmonary hypertension, we do not get any etiology by investigation, CT, etc. So catheterization is helpful or should be done in all patients in these patients?
Majority of IPH patients, we don't get etiology, So catheterization is recommended by governing bodies, by all this ESCC, ACC, but I think if the patient is very sick, we should not catheterize, because the catheterization in PH is a risky business, and people must appreciate this, that catheter is not mandatory for diagnosis of idiopathic PH. It will be needed when you are in doubt whether you have ruled out the type 2, whether the wedge pressures are ruled out, and then if as a matter of policy, if you're going to start some treatment, it's a good idea. If the patient is safe and you catheterize, then you will have some more data to see how PVRI is behaving. So it is desirable, but not mandatory. And if there's a doubt about pulmonary wedge pressures in them, one catheterize. But we must not catheterize a class 4 patient with PH. Let him stabilize, and then only we think of catheter.
In such patients, I think ventilation perfusion scan and CT is very essential, because thromboembolic pulmonary arterial hypertension is very treatable.
Absolutely, and clinically they almost always masquerade as IPH only, unless you are very perceptive and realize that they are stuttering, they are worsening over sudden stutters, which is suggestive of recurrent embolism. So that is the point.
So 2 questions that are coming is from Dr. Vijay. He says that is genetic testing being done in AIIMS for pulmonary hypertension, and what is the role of 6-minute walk test in patients of PH? And second question is by Dr. Soumya. She says that what is pulmonary stroke volume and how do we calculate it?
Pulmonary
stroke volume.
Stroke volume. Okay. So obviously these are people who are reading and they don't need this kind of a talk. I didn't pitch it for them. So genetic testing we are not doing in AIIMS. I personally do not think it is needed, because it doesn't tell anything. This is a Western science which doesn't sync with me. I don't think genetic testing is needed. But yes, irritable PH, somebody wants to learn and know about it, there's no harm. It can give something, but we are at AIIMS, there is a genetic lab bringing up, and maybe in future they might do it, but I don't see much point in that. Pulmonary stroke volume, pulmonary stroke volume divided by pulse pressure is a sign of pulmonary compliance. Pulmonary stroke volume means pulmonary flow per heartbeat. So if you have pulmonary flow from whatever, cath or otherwise, 3 liter pulmonary flow and heartbeat is 100. So each stroke volume is giving 30 ml of blood. So that is pulmonary stroke volume. So pulmonary blood flow divided by heart rate. And that divided by pulse pressure gives you an idea of how stiff are the vessels, what is the lung compliance, which is a measure of a ventricular afterload beyond pressure. So how this heart is going to face that and how the heart is going to fare, ventricular arterial coupling, if you like, would vary with compliance.
Thank you so much. Any other comments by the moderators? And then we close the session.
Thank you.
Balbir Singh, Dr. Tyagi and Dr. Issa.
Thank you very much. We should have another presentation by Dr. Kothari.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, again for joining on behalf of the CSI. And I also extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the moderators and hundreds of residents who have joined. And let me tell you, we are next week coming up with the next series of webinars, which will be including one of the most common topics that is dealt with in exams is rheumatic heart disease. We'll be covering acute rheumatic fever and the severity of rheumatic heart disease. So please join us. Many of you are asking about these lectures. Yes, with the permission of our faculty, we'll be loading all these lectures on the dedicated website of Delhi CSI and the YouTube channel, which we have already shared in the group. So you are free to download and use it only for the academic purpose. This is for you, but this will take some time before we edit it. And you have any suggestions, comments, the email is right there in front of you. Please write to us. You want to listen to any particular talk by any particular doctor, you are more than welcome. And sir, expectedly, as I told you, thank you so much again, Dr. Kothari, for agreeing. It took me honestly a little time to convince you, quite a few of emails, but I am really obliged on the behalf of Delhi CSI so that you could make it and give us a very comprehensive and a very elaborate talk on pulmonary hypertension, which was a great learning for almost all of us, I believe, on this journey.
Just one message which I would like to read, Dr. Kothari.
Yes, sir.
Sir, this is one of the message by Dr. Ajay Mahajan. He is a professor of cardiology from LT Municipal Hospital, Sion, Mumbai. He says, sir, hats off to you. I learned a lot. So this is the impact of your talk, sir. It is a learning process for most of us. We learned a lot of things from you. And thank you, and we would like to have you again and again in this session.
And it's from Sion Hospital, sir, which is the COVID hospital.
Professor Mahajan is a kind man, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. I hope somebody learned something. I tried, to give them at a resident level. I didn't cover very high, but I hope this much may be of use to them.
No, it was great, sir. And thank you, Professor Sir, respected Dr. Tyagi and Dr. Balbir Singh from the presidency. Sir, if you could finally give your closing comments, Dr. Balbir, and then we log off.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So you have to, sir.
So I have to exit full screen. And,
so Dr. Kothari, thanks very much. And I would also like to thank Mohit for putting in so many efforts. I think it is one of the greatest things that has happened to Delhi CSI. And I will make sure that we do better and better with time. And this has to continue because this will set a very high level of teaching in this country. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
I'll stop video. How do I get out? Am I done?